My name is Mara Ellison, and the morning of my wedding smelled like rain. Not the kind that cancels plans, but the kind that softens air and coaxes light into a patient glow. In the bridal suite, the window was cracked open, distant traffic hummed underneath a canopy of sparrows. I moved my palms over the silk of my dress, smoothing nothing and everything at once, while my best friend Noor pinned my veil and asked if I wanted music. I said no. I wanted to hear the world exactly as it was. The first hint that the world wasn't interested in being kind arrived with a knock that came too softly for the corridor. When the door opened, Elaine, a woman who would be my mother-in-law by evening, stepped inside with the careful grace of someone inspecting a museum piece. She wore charcoal satin, hair like a lacquered wave. She complimented the flowers with a smile that never reached her eyes and asked for a moment alone. Noor caught my gaze in the mirror, a quiet question, and slipped out with a reassuring squeeze of my shoulder. Elaine approached me and, for a breath, simply adjusted a pin near my temple. "There," she murmured. "Beautiful." Then, drifting close so our reflections stood cheek to cheek, she spoke in a voice soft enough to hide. "You can still walk away, you know." I blinked at her in the glass. "Why would I?" She smiled as if we shared a secret. "Because secrets have a way of spilling. It would be compassionate to leave before Ben sees your motives." Her perfume smelled like green tea and citrus. Calm. Expensive. It made the word seem unreasonable, as if I'd misheard. My motives. Elaine's gaze flicked to my dress, then my hands, then the small satin bag on the vanity. "You've always been sensible, Mara. Ben is idealistic. Sweet. He believes love is enough. A wedding doesn't have to be a ledger, even when the numbers don't add up. But it does become one when parties are uneven." Her phrases were polished, deniable. But the shape of them was unmistakable: gold digger, opportunist, not from their world. I felt the room tilt in a way that had nothing to do with the corseted waist. "You think I'm marrying him for money?" "I think," she said, eyes floating to the window where drizzle stitched silver threads across glass, "you will find this family has long memories. If you love him, leave now. Otherwise, enjoy the photographer." She glided toward the door, her hem whispering over carpet. On the threshold she paused and turned her head just enough. "You don't want to learn how sharp kindness can be when it bends into pity." Then she was gone, and the scent of her perfume remained like a polite echo after a cruel sentence. I stood at the mirror and watched my throat rise and fall. My heart was not galloping, it was steady, unervingly so. Noor re-entered, read my face the way close friends do, and didn't ask what had been said. She only offered water, then humor, then a tissue. I laughed once, quietly, because the tissue felt like an apology from the day for what it had allowed to happen. In the corridor, feet passed and voices braided. Somewhere a florist scolded ribbon. The air conditioning sighed. Even the building seemed to hold its breath for the ceremony, and in that stillness I realized what unsettled me most. Not that Elaine believed these things, but that she believed she could loosen me from my life with a whisper. As if my love for Ben were just a veil that could be lifted and put away. Noor fastened the last clasp on my dress. "We're at 5 minutes," she said. "Do you want to sit?" "No," I said, and my voice surprised me with its gentleness. "I want to walk." The hallway to the garden was washed in pale light. I could hear the quartet warming up, a waterfall of strings mending anxiety into a long thread. When I reached the door, I saw the guests settle, the white aisle like a path cut through a field of faces. And at the end of it, under an arch of eucalyptus and freesia, stood Ben. His smile wasn't showy, it was the kind that built quietly, the way morning becomes day. He didn't know that his mother had just told me to leave him. He didn't know about the whisper that tried to carve a fissure into the hour we had planned for months. The rain paused as if to listen. I stepped forward, and we began. Our vows sat in my pocket, folded into four. They had been written late at night at our kitchen table, the wood marked by coffee cups and pizza boxes and the slow, faithful progress of the life we shared. The things we promised were small and enormous: to ask questions, to choose curiosity over certainty, to find the light switch when the room felt haunted. As I spoke them, I kept my voice steady and my eyes on Ben's, as if to show the air itself that intimacy is louder than accusation. We were pronounced, kisses and applause breaking into sunshine. I let myself have the first clean breath since the bridal suite. People who loved us were clapping, the quartet slipped into a melody that bounced off glass, and I let it all wash over me like a tide that knew exactly where it was going. I thought, Elaine can keep her suspicions and I'll keep this moment. Then the reception began, and moments became hours, and the tide turned in ways that were almost invisible. A college friend of Ben's congratulated me, then paused, confused. "Wait, so, you're keeping your job?" I heard, "No, never mind. Rumors. Stupid." He laughed it off. An aunt I'd met twice shifted her pearls and asked, was it hard, growing up, lingering on hard, as if it contained a diagnosis. The vendor switched our playlist without asking, then insisted Elaine had approved changes. Ben's groomsmen nudged him, whispering something I couldn't catch, and their eyes flickered to me with the reflexive guilt of children. I felt it moving, a current beneath the parquet floor. Not a storm, storms are honest. This was fog drifting in from invisible water, soft and smothering, designed to make you doubt your feet. At the dessert table, I found Noor. "It's spreading," I said. "What is?" "Her voice," I said, and the music glinted off the glasses as if to confirm it. "Just, quieter now." The room itself had excellent manners. Tall ceilings. Soft bulbs inside smoked glass pendants. Brick walls that kept the city's sound at a distance without insisting on silence. Even the floor, warm wood squares crossed by a fan of light from the east windows, seemed to invite conversations to slow down and find their shape. It was the kind of place planned for tenderness, not for campaign. Yet a campaign had begun. It moved through handshakes, through the careful gift of a smile that arrives differently than it leaves. It moved in the way people frame questions to imply answers, then pretend the answer was yours. I watched it settle over guests like an additional layer to their outfits, curiosity for some, concern for others, calculation for a few. The cruelty wasn't in volume but in aim. It targeted reputation, which is a kind of oxygen even in the smallest family. I have worked in nonprofit finance for 7 years. The job taught me that numbers are stories, and stories can be held to account. At our apartment, Ben and I split bills and grocery lists and the dumb, loving logistics of 2 lives braided into one. "Every spreadsheet is a portrait of a person's values," Ben once said, and I made ours on Sunday nights, smiling at his phrase. Standing at our reception, I felt that portrait being redrawn by someone else's hand. Elaine was careful not to be seen pushing. She floated between tables with the composure of a seasoned host, eyes bright, posture exact. She was the kind of woman who could turn a toast into a lesson in posture without saying a word. When she finally came to me, her voice was silk again. "Enjoying yourself?" "I am," I said, matching her calm. "Wonderful." "It all came together," she said, as if she alone had braided the day. A beat. Ben looked so handsome when he cried. "You're terribly lucky." I held her gaze because I wanted her to see herself reflected. "We both are." "Of course." Sip, smile. "I did wonder about your vows. Choose curiosity over certainty," a lovely line. "I hope you'll forgive the certainty of older people." Her eyes glanced toward the stage where the DJ fiddled with cables. "It keeps us from expensive mistakes." I thought of the bridal suite, the whisper near my ear. I thought of the friend who asked about my job, the aunt who framed my childhood like a case study, the playlist quietly remixed to feel like someone else's memory. I thought of the person I chose to marry, who believed gentleness could be a kind of courage. I saw the shape of the risk, not losing Ben to some dramatic revelation, but losing us by inches, day after day, to the corrosive rain of insinuation. I carried plates with Noor to the head table as if nothing were wrong. Ben squeezed my hand and brushed my cheek with a kiss that felt like ceremony again. He told me stories from guests I hadn't reached yet, the way people tell news they trust. My cousin says you helped her with grad school loans, he said, eyes warm. I didn't even know that. She asked me to look, I said. It was small. Small to you, he said, and it landed like a promise that he still saw me clearly. The speeches started. Toast after toast, some tender, some funny, one mercifully brief, rose and fell across the room's attention like a tide without moons. When Ben began to speak, I felt the sudden ache of fear that he would choose his mother's version of me without knowing he'd chosen. That's the danger of fog, it asks nothing of you until you're already lost. He thanked our families, his voice steady, a little wry. He thanked my mother for the quilt she'd sewn, each square a habit of love transformed into color. He thanked Elaine for the rehearsal dinner and the way she always makes a room feel like a second home. He turned toward me then, a small private turn despite the 100 people. Mara, he said, and I realized I'd braced for impact. She taught me that budgets are love letters, he said, and laughter lifted, surprised. Seriously. The first gift she gave me was a spreadsheet that predicted we could afford a new coffee grinder if we cut our takeout by 25% for 2 months. It sounds unromantic unless you understand that she wrote us a future we could afford to believe in. That tenderness isn't just a feeling you have, it's a practice you keep. I felt the room lean toward us, just a degree. Elaine's expression didn't change, but something retreated behind her eyes, and I realized what I could lose if I did nothing. Not just reputation. The ease with which Ben and I moved around each other, the unspoken trust that tomorrow would be ours to design. Rumors don't destroy marriages in a single night, but they can assign a narrator to your life who isn't you. And people begin to quote. As the applause faded, the DJ gave me the microphone for my speech. The metal was cool in my hands, grounding. I spoke about the quiet dailiness of love, about coffee and calendars and the way Ben comforts strangers without making a performance of it. I kept my tone gentle, almost conversational, because that's how truth prefers to enter a room. I ended with a line I'd written while listening to the rain morning after morning. We are lucky in the way gardens are lucky, someone always tended the soil before us. Today we promise to do the tending. I handed the mic back, and when the music returned, Elaine approached the DJ again. It was small, her hand on the edge of the booth, a tilt of her head, and it would have been nothing if I weren't paying attention. But I was. The song shifted into a standard she adored, the tempo a fraction slower than we'd chosen, like nostalgia performing etiquette. I saw 2 bridesmaids exchange a look. I saw an uncle lean toward Ben with a whisper that made him smile and glance at me, curious. Fog moved. I did not know how to clear a room of it without becoming the storm Elaine could point to later. What I knew was this, somewhere, hidden inside this day, was a way to tell the truth in a voice that matched my own. If truth had a sound, it would be closer to a message than a speech, closer to a letter than an argument. I needed to find it before someone else signed my name to their story. Proof doesn't always look like paper. Sometimes it hums in your pocket. A week before the wedding, I'd missed a call while riding the bus home. When I arrived at our apartment, my phone had converted the voicemail into a strange transcript full of guesses and typos. The text made little sense. Flowers became followers, music cues became mystic use, but the voice was unmistakable, Elaine, brisk and affectionate in the way she spoke to people who worked for her. The message was meant for someone else. She hadn't realized I was in the loop she was drawing. Or maybe she had and didn't care if I learned to love the loop. I pressed play, then again. I listened 3 times before saving it, not because I anticipated a war but because something in me recognized the anatomy of doubt. I told myself I was saving it to confirm the floral delivery time she mentioned at the end. I told myself a lot of things until the 3rd listen, when her intent separated like oil from water. Make sure the quartet understands we'll switch the 2nd set, the recording said, her voice as precise as a ruler. It should feel elevated. No, I don't want to ask Mara, she'll say no and make it a thing. Keep the tempo modest for their first dance. It isn't a nightclub. And Claire, you know how she is, will ask about the prenup if she has a drink. Better if she asks early. I want it in the air. A pause. The soft sound of someone agreeing. Then, we need someone to be realistic for Ben. He falls in love with the idea of people. He didn't notice when Alicia bled him for a year. He won't notice this either, unless we create context. I'll talk to him before the rehearsal dinner. If Mara's reasonable, she won't take offense. Another pause, lower. And if she does, well, better to find that out now. The message ended with, "Oh, and please move the seating, Mara's mother can't sit with the donors, it's unkind to everyone. Put her near the kitchen where she'll be comfortable." I'd sat in our quiet kitchen, the refrigerator making its small domestic hum, listening to Elaine plan who I was. I didn't tell Ben because the rehearsal week is a house of cards and every household is his own weather. I told myself maybe I'd misinterpret, that weddings can make good people procedural, that the seating change could be fixed. I forwarded the voicemail to my files, where I put recipes and tax letters and our agreement about who takes out trash on Thursdays. Then I made tea and planned to let kindness be contagious. At the reception, I felt the phone's weight in my bag like a small, steady pulse. The music shifted again. The fog moved. Noor saw my face and raised her brows. "Do you have something?" "I think I do," I said. "Then you don't think," she replied softly, eyes kind. "You know." I watched Elaine cross to a table of donors and laugh in that bright, audible way that acts like a ribbon. The irony wasn't lost on me. She believed she was protecting her son. I believed I was protecting the life he chose. Perhaps love and control use similar tools and only differ in their willingness to be wrong. At the edge of the stage, the DJ nodded at me, a question held in a chin lift. I approached. "Do you have an auxiliary input?" "Always," he said, cheerful, the professional ease of someone who has seen everything from spontaneous karaoke to surprise proposals. "What are we doing?" "We're going to keep the night honest," I said, and if that sounded dramatic, it wasn't in my throat, it was clean. Ben noticed me with the DJ and came over, curiosity first, then concern. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "I need you to trust me for 60 seconds. His eyes searched my face and found something he recognized. He nodded. "We are not a theatrical couple, we don't stage moments. But sometimes stage and truth occupy the same square of floor, and refusing the square is its own kind of lie." I took the microphone. The room's 100 conversations thinned in threads and then gathered. I could hear the way a room listens, the air makes a different shape. "I'm going to ask for a small moment," I said, voice even. "There's been a narrative in the air tonight. It's subtle, perhaps unintentional. But narratives have consequences." A murmur. I kept the softness. I believe in telling stories with receipts. The laugh that came was nervous and kind at once. I opened my bag and withdrew my phone. Noor had already handed the DJ a cable. I nodded to him. The first second of the voicemail, a click, a throat clear, filled the speakers. My name wasn't mentioned. Elaine's was unmistakable. Make sure the quartet understands we'll switch the second set. The room went still in that particular way where even glass seems to listen. The edges of the space sharpened, the bulbs above us hummed. Elaine's face didn't change at first. Then her hand moved to her necklace, a reflex like checking a lifeline. She stepped forward, but there was nowhere to step that wouldn't be the center. I let the message play itself to completion. I didn't look at Ben while it did. I looked at the tables where people I loved had begun to hold their breath. When the line about my mother's seating arrived, near the kitchen where she'll be comfortable, my mother reached for my father's hand, and he gave it to her with a quiet, old intimacy that steadied the floor. The message ended. Silence met its own echo. I lifted the microphone again. Weddings, I said, are about hospitality. Hospitality is telling the truth about who's in the room and making space for them as they are. Then I turned to Ben. His face held shock and something like grief, but not for me. I could see the calculus of a son who'd been protected so aggressively he hadn't noticed how often protection arrives disguised as doubt. He took a breath, and the breath had weight. Mom, he said, voice calm. Is there anything you'd like to say? Elaine's eyes were glass and storm. She moved her lips, then stopped. She could have apologized. She could have said it was out of context, and perhaps she believed that would be true. Instead, something old in her refused to be wrong in public. I was trying, she said evenly, to prevent a mistake. Ben nodded slowly. And in doing so, you made one. The fog thinned, not because the proof was dramatic, but because it was spoken in her own voice. Rumor collapses when it has to sit in a chair and give its name. I put my phone away, heart steady but not triumphant. Proof isn't victory. It's a path back to the room where people can choose the person they are. We didn't eject Elaine from the reception. We didn't turn the evening into theater. That would have satisfied the part of me that likes symmetry, but it would have damaged something more important, the ability for this family to repair without spectacle. Ben and I stepped outside with Noor and our officiant to the hotel's quiet terrace. The rain had returned in a fine, almost invisible drift, mist settling onto railings like a blessing that didn't presume to know our needs. Below, taxis braided yellow lines through the wet street. Ben leaned his elbows on the railing and let his breath out slowly. I'm sorry, he said, which wasn't what I expected. You didn't ask her to do it, I said. But I didn't stop her before she did, he replied, and there it was, the responsibility children of forceful parents learn to claim, even when it's not theirs. I've always thought of Mom as effective. She decides things. I got so used to choosing my battles that I didn't notice the shape of the battlefield anymore. Our officiant, an old friend who liked to joke that her religion was mid-century lamps, spoke gently. Every marriage has in-laws, even when the in-laws are just expectations. Today you set a boundary. Tomorrow you will keep it, and the keeping is the justice. Noor slid a folded paper into my hand. In case you want a letter with a few corners, she said. It was a cease-and-desist template she'd pulled from her paralegal days, stripped of aggressive teeth, written in the quiet grammar of consequence. I smiled at her and tucked it into my bag, not because I wanted to escalate but because tools exist to remind us we have choices beyond endurance. We returned to the room together. Ben found his mother near the dessert table, where a lemon tart gleamed like a polite sun. He spoke to her in a calm I recognized as post-storm, gentle, unyielding. Mom, he said, we'll keep celebrating tonight. Tomorrow, Mara and I will meet you at noon. We'll talk about what you did, what you hope to accomplish, and what will change. If you prefer, we can include a mediator. Her expression arranged itself into elegance. A mediator. A person who helps people hear each other, he said. I love you. I'm your son. I'm also Mara's husband. Those truths have to make a room together. If they can't, then we'll make a room without the things that can't enter. I watched the sentence land and leave. Something brittle inside Elaine protested. I could see it in the angle of her jaw. But something braver had already been invited. She nodded once. The rest of the reception leaned back into itself. People returned to dancing, to delight, the relief palpable and kind. My mother moved to a better table without ceremony. The donors followed her like flowers follow light. The DJ, with a sensitivity I will be grateful for until I am old, returned the playlist to the songs we'd chosen together. Ben and I danced to a tempo we recognized as ours. The next day, we met Elaine in a quiet cafe with large windows and small spoons. We arrived with coffee already in our hands, so the ritual of ordering couldn't inflate the room. A mediator joined us, a woman named Gia with an anchored presence and a voice like a level. She set 3 short pencils on the table and asked for intentions. I want to keep my son, Elaine said, perhaps surprised by the simplicity of her own admission. I want us to have a marriage that isn't a negotiation, I said. I want to love both of you without making love a weapon, Ben added. Gia nodded. Good. Then we'll speak in specifics. Elaine explained Alicia, his ex, drawing out the year of small thefts, not money, but belief, time, the way a person can cash checks on someone's optimism until the account is overdrawn. I told myself, she said, voice steadying, that if I didn't protect Ben, he wouldn't know he needed it. I decided you were a pattern, Mara, before I knew you were a person. I made a plan. I executed it. And you chose rumor as your hammer, I said. You tried to make me tiny enough to fit your worry. She flinched. The truth isn't always a kindness, but it can be a clarity. Gia asked Elaine to list the harm she caused, then she asked what repair would look like to each of us. Not revenge. Repair. There are differences that matter like oxygen. We landed on simple, enforceable things, a written apology to my parents, who believed in hospitality more than pride, a public correction to the guests she had primed, an agreement that decisions about our home and events would be ours, not committed by whispers, a gift we hadn't expected, Elaine's offer to fund a scholarship in my mother's name at the community center where I worked, shaped by my mother's choice, not hers. We also agreed on a boundary that felt like a door with hinges. For 2 months, Elaine would not contact us without planning. Every Sunday, we would decide if the coming week held space for a visit or call. It was a structure that kept love from becoming logistics. The letter Noor had given me remained in my bag, and used, not as a threat but as a reminder that we had other paths if this one failed. When we stood to leave, Elaine looked smaller in a way that wasn't pitying, like a large idea had loosened its grip on her bones. I wanted to be the mother who kept my son safe, she said. I forgot the part where mothers also teach sons to keep themselves. Thank you for meeting us, I said. I would have met you anywhere, she said, then winced at her own melodrama. That's not true. I would have met you anywhere I chose. The difference is why we're here. We walked back into a city still damp from last night's rain. The wind lifted hair from my neck like a hand blessing a child. Ben took my hand in his, palm to palm, a shared map. Quiet justice isn't a gavel, it's the daily choreography of not repeating what hurt you. We had begun to learn it. Years later, I think about the way the bulbs hummed when I pressed play. The sound was so small, nearly imagined, a thread stitched through the air as the room decided whether it would be complicit or brave. I return to that hum when I feel tempted to correct a story with volume instead of proof. I return to it when I plan our budget on Sundays and remember that the loveliest lines in our life are made from numbers and restraint, not spectacle. Repair isn't linear. Elaine kept her promise for the 2 months and then broke it, gently, with a text proposing dinner that ignored our Sunday boundary. We reminded her. She resented the reminder and then respected it, which is a choreography people practice until their muscles remember. The apology to my parents arrived on thick paper in careful script. My mother read it at the kitchen table and folded it into the quilt square she was piecing, as if to absorb its edges into cloth. At the community center, the scholarship in her name funded 2 night classes for women who wanted to change careers without asking permission from their lives. One of them, a woman named Tilda with laugh-creased eyes, brought a loaf of warm bread to a Saturday workshop and told me she hadn't baked in years. I remembered who I was, she said, and I realized repair can travel farther than the room where it started. Ben and I still have arguments about dishes, about whether it's more respectful to announce you're paying for dinner or to just do it. We argue about his habit of leaving shoes like breadcrumbs from the door to the couch. We haven't argued about my motives since the wedding because Proof settled that debate in a voice that didn't belong to me. Once, at a family gathering, a cousin made a joke that would have landed differently before our boundary. "So, Mara," he grinned, "how's the ledger? Return on investment looking solid?" Elaine cut him off with a look, not furious, just precise. "We don't measure people with jokes," she said, and the room exhaled. I didn't need her to defend me, that wasn't the point. The point was the air had learned something about itself. I wrote a letter after our first anniversary, not to Elaine, not to Ben, but to the version of me who stood at the mirror while a whisper tried to dismantle a life. I wrote it in the late afternoon with light thrown against our living room wall in rectangles. I wrote, "Dear bride at the window. The first test of your marriage won't be the test you think. It will not be a fight about money or the right way to store pasta. It will be a question of authorship. When doubt sends you its preferred narrator, you will defend your pages with a piece of witness that breathes. You will speak calmly not because the truth is fragile, but because it is strong enough to stand without your fury. You will remember that repair is a verb. You will keep choosing it. When you can, choose gardens. They teach you that care has a schedule and a softness that is not weak. They remind you that roots grow in the dark where no one applauds them. They invite you to love the work no one will see. Love. Mara." I tucked the letter into the pocket of my wedding dress, which hangs in our closet in a garment bag that whispers when I move it. The dress is not a relic, it's a place I lived. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I unzip the bag and touch the fabric to remind myself that tenderness is infrastructure. We built a room inside our life where rumors lose their balance and fall. Elaine still wears green tea perfume. The scent no longer turns my stomach to glass. At Thanksgiving last year, she arrived early and asked where the extra chairs lived. She didn't ask to curate the seating, she asked where we kept the tools to make more room. Ben showed her the closet, and when she carried a chair into the dining room, she paused beside my mother. "You'll sit here," she said, and then added, "unnecessary, but beautiful, where the light is best." When I stand at our window on rain mornings, I can see the city moving beneath a thin veil of weather. The world continues with its opinionated current. We are particular, small swimmers, 2 people who promise to find the light switch when rooms felt haunted. Sometimes the switch is a conversation. Sometimes it's a letter. Once, it was a message that tried to shape me and ended up saving us. Revenge, if that's even the right word for what happened, did not taste like triumph. It tasted like cool water after a long climb. It sounded like a room becoming quiet so it could hear itself. It felt like the steady warmth of the hand that lifts yours when you tell a story that is finally yours to tell. On our 2nd anniversary, we returned to the venue at dusk and stood outside beneath the eucalyptus arch, now bare. The bulbs hummed again, small and unpretending. Ben squeezed my hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For teaching me how to live in a room without fog," he said. "For believing that truth is enough noise." I rested my head on his shoulder and watched the streetlights spill silver onto the sidewalk. The city went on. We went on. We had learned something that would outlast us, that quiet is not the absence of power, but the presence of it, held in a steady hand. And when I forget, I press play, not on a recording, but on the memory of the room that chose to be kind once it hurt itself. I listen to the small hum and remember that evidence is not a weapon, it is a window. We open it, and the air comes in.